All right, gotta talk to you about something. CD Projekt Red, Cyberpunk 2077. I am feeling the cyberpunk hype. The cyber hype. The hype punk. I'm feeling it. We are very close to Cyberpunk 2077, and I know a lot of you will be streaming Cyberpunk at launch. So what I have done is worked up this tutorial to guide you through creating your own Cyberpunk-themed Twitch alert. Let's take a look at what we're going to be making.
You're breathtaking.
The audio there is not part of the tutorial, but I liked it. As always, we're going to start here in DaVinci Resolve on the edit page. I'm going to right click in my media pool, go to timelines and create new timeline. And we are going to name this, go to custom settings, format, and change this timeline resolution. I'm going to change this to 1200 by 300. From here, we need to make sure our effects library is open. Go to effects, fusion composition, and drag that right onto our timeline. Then as long as we're over that, we can click this icon to open the fusion page. This alert has three main components: the background shape, the middle layer with those particles moving up and down, and then our text in the foreground. So let's start creating them in that order. First thing I'm going to do is click this icon to create a 3D shape. We pull that up in either one of our viewers by pressing the 1 or 2 keys or just dragging it. You'll see that by default, it is just a 3D plane, this flat layer. We're going to change that to cylinder, toggle shadows on here so we know what's going on. And if we pull down base subdivisions, you'll see that that changes the overall shape. That's changing how many subdivisions are around the edge of the circle. But if we pull that down to 3, obviously there's only 3 sides, it's a circle. So we're going to pull that up to 6, and we're going to have this nice 6-sided shape. And we're going to click these caps for top and bottom. And then we are going to come down to our rotation options and change this X to 90 and the Y to 90. And then I'm going to take the scale and pull that down to 0.3. You can zoom in to really see what we're working with. Coming out of this, we are going to go into a duplicate 3D node. We're going to pull this copies up to 6. And then with that duplicate now previewed, we are going to change this Z offset. So we have all these duplicates stretching out to the right. And we're going to stretch these out, sort of leave that for now. And then we're going to create another duplicate, make sure that is previewed. And we are going to bring this up and change the position of this. And right now, all we're really going to focus on is this connection here. So I'm going to dial this in so that that is almost touching, but you can still see a little bit of a division there. That really close. And then if I go back to that first duplicate and pull back this Z offset, I'm going to pull them. So now we have that really nice line. Then out of that, I'm going to go into one final duplicate 3D. And if I change the Y offset, again, making sure that's previewed, you'll see that we create another whole row that will sit underneath it. So we have this really cool pattern that sometimes you can just see the connections, but then you really have this pattern on the outside that I really like. And we're going to leave this right here for now. The only other thing I'm going to do real quick is just add a transform 3D node so that we'll be able to control that entire scene just from here. Next, we're going to make that layer of moving particles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this fast noise node, come over to the image settings, uncheck auto resolution, and then I'm actually going to change this from 400 width, 100 height. We'll pull that up in our first viewer, and you'll see it's just this foggy fractal noise type thing. I'm going to pull up the detail, pull up the scale, pull up the contrast so that it's pretty clear. We have lots of clear, bright, and dark areas. And from this fast noise, we're going to go into a P image emitter. Now you won't be able to preview this by itself because it is part of the particle system. So you'll have to connect that to the P render node. But if I do that and then preview, you'll see that it has that fast noise shape. But if we zoom in, you'll see that it is projected that shape across this field of particles. So if you get close, you see the individual ones. But in that image emitter, what we're going to do is actually pull down this density to 0.2 on X and 0.2 on Y. You'll see that spreads it out quite a bit more. We're going to increase the lifespan to 300. That's the entire length of our duration. If we didn't change this and after we got to 100 frames, these particles would simply disappear. Then we're going to hop over to style, change this from my point to blob. And by default, these are pretty large. So I'm going to come down to size and pull down size until you see just individual little blobs and find a nice happy medium we like. So if we preview now, you'll see that we just have this scene and it's static, and that's because we need to go to fast noise and pull up this seed rate. We're gonna pull that up a little bit, and if we glide through our scene, you'll see that this image changes. The bright and dark spots shift around. So coming out of the P image emitter, what we are going to create is a P custom node. The P custom node is crazy powerful. It really unlocks so much potential in this particle system. The effect I'm going to use is one that I touched on in a previous video, but I'm going to use it to a little different of an effect. But you can watch that video for a little more information about this node. So with this P custom node selected, I'm going to click over to this particle tab, and I'm going to be adjusting the position Y. So what we're going to do is delete that and then type R divided by 4. And instantly, if we do a real quick scrub, you'll see that now these particles are sliding up and down over time. So what has this done? We have directed this particle system saying the position Y, so for each of the particles in the scene, the Y position data where it is moving up and down, we want the luminance value of the red channel to drive that. So in those brighter areas, the particle goes up. If it gets darker again, it comes back down. And we've divided by 4 because naturally it's just too large a value, so we want to constrain how far those particles can move. But doing a real quick preview, I'm seeing this motion is probably even a little too fast. So I'm gonna come back to that fast noise and pull down the seed rate so we have a much more slow sort of natural motion. I like that. That's good for now. So coming out of that P-render, I'm gonna grab another transform 3D node just to set us up for the future, but then we're gonna move on to our 3D text. Inside Fusion is this really powerful text 3D node. So we're gonna click that, and then we're gonna type in our text like subscriber. The font I am going to be using is Vermin Vibes. I found it on DaFont, a link will be in the description, but you can really use whatever font you want as long as you make sure it has one key feature, and that is as many flat edges as you can find. The main exploding effect that this text will do in 3D works best with flat edges. So I'm going to change this to my Vermin Vibes. And if I pull this up to preview, you'll see that I have my text. By default, this text will still be flat. And that is because on this first text panel, we need to scroll down to extrusion, click this, and pull up the extrusion depth. I just want it to be something substantive, so mine is at about 0.15. That looks pretty good. Coming out of this Fusion text, we are going to create the weld node. This node is for fixing mistakes that sometimes pop up when you're working with 3D objects, but it has a really interesting feature that we can exploit to get the effect we're looking for. By default, this will be set to weld, but we can change this to fracture. And you won't see anything change now, but what this has actually done is separate every vertice of this 3D shape. So now the top of this text is not actually connected to the front or sides. So coming out of that weld, we are going to create a displace 3D node. And then we're actually gonna copy this fast noise from our image emitter, paste that, and pipe that into the displace node. And you'll see instantly this text freaks out. But on the displace node, you can dial this back with this scale. If we pull it all the way to 0, you see our text will be normal. If we ramp it up, you'll see that that text will actually explode out, and some of these shapes will even rotate in Z space. But now that we know where that control is, I'm gonna bring that down to 0 just so we can work in the scene. So coming out of that displace 3D node, I'm gonna create one more final transform 3D, and then I'm going to take the outputs of all of those transform 3D nodes and pipe them into one merge 3D node. Then I can preview that, and you'll see instantly I made a little whoopsie on this background layer, but we can fix that with this 3D node. You want to come into here, come down to rotation. If we rotate on the Y axis, you'll see it lines right up. So now we're just going to position all 3 of these assets in space so they work together the way we want them to. This particle node will need to be scaled up considerably. You can scale that up, find somewhere to work. So now that I have these positioned, I'm actually going to come out of this merge node and create another merge 3D. And this is where we'll build a real 3D scene with lights in the camera and all of that. And because we haven't added any of these things, this scene is very flat and even hard to tell what's going on. We don't have any lights. But the first thing I'm going to do with that merge selected is click this 3D camera. With the 3D camera selected, we can pull that back in Z space. And if we were to really quick set up the rest of the scene, we're going to have a renderer 3D, so the merge will come out of that, and then that will come to our media out. So we have this camera. I'm going to jump back, and I'm actually going to change this focal length to 16, but that's the only thing I'm going to change now. And then we're going to start creating an array of lights for this scene. I'm going to use this spotlight tool, and with the merge selected, if I click that, it will automatically spawn a few of them. Right now, I'm going to create 3. First light, I'm going to pull back. You'll see that instantly it starts affecting that scene, but I'm going to pull it over here, click this control to toggle rotation, and then I'm going to start dialing this in so that this light is only hitting our entire seed from that left side. I'm going to grab our second light, pull it over here to the right, and sort of mirror that, maybe from a slightly different angle, or that hits the back of the text in a really nice way. And then the third light, I'm going to pull up and back and rotate down a little bit so that this will sort of be a general light for this scene. It gets complicated quick, so you can move around and reposition as need to, but I'm going to pull up this penumbra angle, pull down the cone angle, and on this cover light, I'm really going to pull back the intensity. And this will still look kind of plain, kind of boring, but what will really help is coming into these lights and coloring them. So I'm going to make this first light this little yellow, the second light a nice light electric blue. And now if we pull in the media out coming from that camera, we have this white, and that's because we need to go to our renderer 3D and make sure lighting is enabled, shadows as well. And we're starting to see something being built here. So I can actually grab my camera, move that back forward, and we start to see our scene being formed. And this is largely a matter of taste. You can take as much time as you want positioning these lights in this 3D scene. Minor changes will make a difference. If I take any one of these lights and just nudge it in 3D space, you'll see that the shadows it casts on the scene are completely different and could be a completely different look. I'm even gonna pull up this sort of overview light we had, pull it down so it's a little more, and we're even seeing it cast shadow on that background. That's pretty cool. I'm actually gonna colorize that a little bit, like a nice yellow as well. So now I'm actually gonna go back to this background first shape 3D layer, change that from a white to a black, so it's nice and punchy. That's looking great, but I'm gonna keep the particles and our text white so they really soak up all these colored lights. This is pretty good. The only thing I'm gonna do is copy that first spotlight, paste that into our scene, and I'm going to zoom in, reposition, and this light is just gonna really fire up those particles. So I'm gonna change this in Z space, punch in a bit, really come at it from an angle and rotate, but I'm gonna crank down this cone angle so we know exactly where that's hitting. And we'll see here, it's really hitting those particles now. So I'm actually gonna crank up this intensity to 4 or 5, and just about there, I've really hit those particles so that they are really getting hit by that light, and they're a little easier to see on this backdrop. As I said, this is a matter of taste, so expect for it to take a little while to really get it to look the way you want it to. You'll notice that our alert is still pretty small in the frame, and that is intentional. The exploding animation we're gonna add, I really want to have an effect. So the more room we leave for that explosion in frame to explode out, the better it'll feel. This is also where that change to the camera we made comes in. I changed that to 16mm. So even though it looks on this view like our footage is really close to the camera, any movement we have towards the camera will be extremely exaggerated because it is close to that lens. So we're gonna do that main exploding animation, and that's gonna come from a zoom back. So the first thing I'm gonna do, now that we like how this is set up, we're gonna set a few different keyframes, and we're gonna set this to come back and rest at this point. The first of those will be on this merge 3D that all of our assets are plugged into. I'm gonna come over to transform and keyframe that position. Then I'm gonna come to our first shape 3D of our background shape, and in the transform panel there, I'm going to keyframe scale for that. And then under displace, I'm gonna keyframe that scale. So now we're gonna move back in time a little bit, and I'm gonna change all of those parameters. But because I set those keyframes where we want to rest, we can set the settings for that main explosion, and it'll automatically set those keyframes and then move back to the safe scene where we want to rest. So let's start with this displace 3D. That's a fun one. I'm gonna pull up the scale. We'll see our text start to shatter. Then on this main merge 3D, as that text explodes, I'm also gonna move the entire scene towards the camera. We have a little bit of this asset being cut off, but it's this main quick motion. I'm okay with that for now. And then we're also gonna come to this background shape and scale up that so it fills a bit more of frame. And I'm even noticing this isn't quite even, so I'm gonna jump over to my camera, and if I pull that down a little bit, just a hair on the Y, you'll see that it was just a matter of getting that framed up in that Z space. So now if we scroll forward in time from this main, this will be as exploded as it gets. It comes back and rests on that scene we created. But before that keyframe, the main exploded animation, it just stays there. So I'm gonna come back a little bit on this first displace. I'm not gonna go all the way back to the beginning of our composition, but I'm gonna come a little bit ways, pull that scale back down so the text is whole. And then I'm actually gonna go back to the beginning of our scene, go to that shape 3D node, set that scale back to 0.3. And on that first merge 3D node that all of those assets are coming into, I'm gonna push that way back into Z space. You'll still be able to see that, but we'll sort that later. So now if I scrub, this comes towards the camera, it comes into our light, then explodes, and then pushes back and rests. But you might have noticed that when this was at its most energetic, it had actually pushed past the 3D lights we set up, so it was exploding into darkness. But we can solve that by creating some more 3D lights. So I'm actually gonna go to when this explosion is at its peak, and I'm going to create first one spotlight. Preview this in our 3D scene, and this is that spotlight we create. I'm gonna click that spotlight, pull it back, pull it up, and I'm actually gonna go into rotation and change that X rotation to -90. So this is now pointing straight down, and you'll see that little positioning I've done actually has it almost perfect right over this exploding 3D scene. I'm gonna pull it back. So now it's centered and over that. And I'm actually gonna come down to this first controls page and pull down the cone angle on that. So it is almost a perfect spotlight shining right down on this 3D text. We're gonna change that to one of these bright yellows we had earlier. Then I'm going to copy that spotlight, paste that back into our 3D scene, move it over. We'll see it has moved a copy over. So now we're affecting this part of the exploded text. We're gonna change that to a nice one of these electric blues we were working with, nice and vibrant. And then I'm just gonna copy and paste that light one more time back in and pull this copy of the light over to the other side of our text. Now, if we do a slow scrub here, you'll see the text is coming back. As it comes up and explodes, it pushes into these bright electric lights, and that really features that exploding motion, and then it sorts back into this nice well-lit scene we had earlier. Now there are only two major animations left to sort. The push back of our entire scene in space at the end, and then the fade in and fade out of the entire thing. So I'm going to select that 3D merge that has all our assets in it, go towards the end of our composition, and with a little bit of time left, go to the transform, set a keyframe on that Z position, then go to the end and just push that back. And then out of this render 3 node, we are going to add a brightness and contrast node. Toggle on this A so it controls alpha as well. And then at 0, we can pull this gain down, set a keyframe, go a few keyframes in, set that back up to 1, and then do the reverse at the end. So that as this starts to slide away, set a keyframe, then go to the end and pull that down to 0. And then we can go to the edit page to preview this, but word of the warning, this won't look perfect quite yet. So I've hopped back over to the edit page and I've added a neutral gray in the background to help us see what this might look like over some normal footage. And if we preview this, it comes in, it explodes, goes in, rests, and then zooms out. And like I said, this doesn't look great. The bones of the animation are in there. They're probably even close to perfect in terms of timing, but we need to control the ease. So I'm gonna jump back into this Fusion composition. And now I'm gonna open my spline viewer. And here, by default, it'll show you every parameter that you have keyframed. If you don't see anything here, it's probably because you have to come up to these 3 dots and uncheck Show Only Tool Selected. This is really helpful depending on the project, but I'm just gonna turn on the shape, displace, merge, and brightness and gain. And if I click this button, zoom to fit, it'll show me all of those keyframes over the course of my clip. So this batch right here is our intro animation. And the first thing we're gonna do is select all of these keyframes and click F to flatten them out. But we'll see that this main explode, the most jarring thing is how it reaches and then instantly comes in pretty quick back down to here. So I'm gonna zoom in and select the keyframes for that displace and the merge coming back to normal. Select those and pull those back in space so they have a little more time. But with those selected, I'm going to click T to open our easing controls, and I'm going to ramp up this ease in so that the main explode hits, it holds for a little bit, and then comes down, but it takes a while to ease into that final position. And then I'm also come down to this main merge move, and I'm gonna put some inverse easing on that so it comes zooming from the background really quick. Explode bit is looking a little better, but it still takes a while to get there. So next change I'm gonna make is to select this whole batch of keyframes outside of our first view and pull them back so that main zoom happens quicker. It zooms from the back right into that exploding animation. And I'm gonna move forward with that for now, but I'm gonna go to the end of the scene, select all of these and add a flatten as well, and change the last one on that merge 3 pushing back and invert that as well so it's nice and snappy pushing back. So I'm gonna let this preview and we'll see where we're at. And here we have a motion I really like. It's energetic, it's fun, the ongoing motion of the particles is really cool, the explode totally works, and I even really lucked out with the position of some of our lights, so when the alert is sort of zooming forward and then pushing back, it catches one of those and it looks really cool. So the last major thing we have to look at is exporting. So I'm going to delete this solid color, so now we have an actual transparent background here, and then we're gonna jump over to the deliver page. And for Resolve to export with an alpha layer, you need to make sure this individual clips option is selected. Then you can scroll down. There are a few different options which let you export alpha, but the one I'm going to be using here is DNxHR 422 12-bit. And if you scroll down, you will see this export alpha option. You can click that, make sure your resolution is correct. And then you just have to select a destination, give it a custom name, click add to render queue, and that will send it over to this side of the screen where you can click start render to begin processing that. After you have that finished file, you'll need to convert it to WebM for optimal delivery on your stream. I have one video that walks through how to do that in the free utility FFmpeg, a link to that video in the description. Or there are a few different free websites that let you upload a file, it will convert to WebM, and you can download that. And then you can drop it right into your streaming platform of choice. This video was super fun to put together. We touched on a lot of different concepts, and it actually built on some of my previous videos in cool ways, so I was glad to bring back some of those elements, and I'm pretty happy with the final product. If any of you used this tutorial to create this alert or one like it, and end up using it on stream, let me know. I would love to see it. Drop a link in the comments. I've slowly been rolling out live streams as well. I think it's a great opportunity for live Q&A. So if any of you would like to interact on Twitch, a link to that will be in the description as well. Once again, I really hope this video was useful to you. And if it was, consider subscribing. Thanks. I'll see you next time.